listening the audience by telepathy that we would rather press through so we can get to those after actions, since the conversation that we just had are pretty good and engageful, so that we can then try to turn to, as we know, some of you got to get packed up and ready to head back home. So with further ado, my apologies if we interrupted your plan, but we're going to roll right through. So we got the following slides. Can you go to the next slide, please? Now, these are some of those summaries of the after action high level that we received. Those of you that scanned the QR code and submitted an after action, thank you for A, listening, B, for following through, and 3, helping us capture what were your thoughts. The time is not over yet. You can still scan it and capture it so we can follow through. Furthermore, while I'm in that effort, thank you for those that sat down with contact our support staff to register. If you have not registered with our support staff, please do so. That will help us kind of keep track, especially those that were here in person, and be able to kind of follow through another conversation. A couple of thank yous from the admin side. Thank you, because we started requesting everybody to keep the conversation at an unclassified level, and I believe we did that. So thank you for listening us to that part. I know it's a little itchy. Sometimes our topics escalate, but we kept each other at check there. Also, thank you for not taking photos when we asked you to, and we also were helping each other out. So thank for those that were saying, hey, brother, sister, let's not take a photo. We're going to get those slides out to you. Also, for the briefers, not only thank you for coming together, getting those material to us, but staying on time and keeping up with me as I was trying to keep us on time. So I say all that because it shows the fact that we're able to kind of close up a little early and allow every one of the presenters that got ready to share the material. So thank you, because that can't be done without the supporting of the attendees, both virtually and in person. Before I forget, Chief Warrant Officer Evans provided a really good presentation of what they're doing out there in MARSOC. He also brought a cool Spectrum Guard Pro so you can visually see what it looks like. So although we're about to finish, he's been nice enough to actually, with his staff's arm, has it out there. So please, if you have not seen it firsthand, do not miss the opportunity to walk back there and actually see it firsthand. I'll say that especially for those of us in the Beltway that might not be so close to gear in the field. This is a really good opportunity to ask those questions, especially after we have known the interest from the fleet of that requirement and actually putting it to use. And last, and definitely not least, because now I'm going to have Art help me go through the summary of action to maybe facilitate those additional questions, is that, in case you do not know, the Dawn CIO East Conference is already made available. The dates are 12 to 15 May of 2025. So, start making a note, taking notes, talking to your command, talk to your friends and colleagues in the East Coast to start making arrangement to attend. It's on a quick Google search or your search engine of choice. My apologies. Did not want to give Google extra trigger time, but you do a quick search, and actually the staff is going to go do it best now that we're completing to kind of start communicating that, obviously, to the service leads, but also to other correspondents. So I say again, 12 to 15 May of 2025. Those are all the immediate admin actions that I had. Art, over to you.
Thanks, Jose. And I just want to make sure that we describe some of the things that we didn't do in the past, is how do we get this information up to our senior leaders and ensure that they understand the impacts that we're seeing on a day-to-day basis. And I know you've heard me say it over and over again, let's stop talking to ourselves. Let's ensure that senior leaders see what is occurring in our offices. These are really what we took away from the 2024 Spectrum Summits. All this was also briefed at essentially Ms. Edgin's Spectrum CFT that she hosts bi-weekly. These are the key categories that we took away that was the common theme of all the key actions that we took. There was a total of about 34 actions that were based in both East and West, but these are the primary topics that we were talking about. Software modernization, I realize that we look at Spectrum 21 and some of the Spectrum tools, and they were essentially built in sometimes, as much as I hate to say it, 1980s and sometimes earlier, that still have a MS-DOS Oracle background capability, which anybody that knows anything about IT, it's not good for how we look at our architectures and how we protect it. Professional military education, I realize for us to be the fighting force of tomorrow, we have to innovate and look at how do we essentially make our spectrum planners smarter, and really understanding the National World Radio Conference, those future architecture planning. We need to start changing our training regimen to ensure that we make you the best that you can. So if you're in that one organization now that requires you to do some type of State Department coordination, you'll at least have the ability to do so, because MARSOC folks, I know that they're doing it on a regular basis now. We can give you the tools to get there. Band studies, operational impacts. I know that none of that information is getting down to the operating forces right now, so we have to do better. And part of that is, what does it really do? What is the real impact? I heard a gentleman 2 days ago talk about when they lost that 100 megahertz, what the impact was to the Gator radar. Until we start getting that information out there holistically, we're not going to really know what's impacting you operationally. And then records maintenance, you heard we did an audit, didn't look good. Some changes need to occur for all our Spectrum 21 files. How do we look at it holistically? And this is me looking at my problem holistically and putting myself on report to make sure that we improve that process. But this is the only way that we get there, and senior leaders are aware of this. And I will tell you, the first time in probably 25, 30 years that I've seen this much senior leadership engaging on Spectrum. In other offices, in other meetings today, they were talking about Spectrum. So we owe it to you, because a lot of times you're raising the flag. We weren't really listening. Well, they're listening now. And I appreciate all your hard work. And with that, I'll turn it over. Who wants to start off? Who has an after action that you want to ensure that we're getting amplified?
Thanks, Art. Looking at the East Conference, can we, and I'd be glad to work with your team, can we, on one of those days, make it specifically for our deck plate sailors and Marines, and it may be a couple of panels and having some discussions, literally what affects them in everyday operations, such as we talked about the 1494, the warrant talked about that. We've got training issues. What is affecting that sailor on board the strike group, or an installation spectrum manager, or our Marines in the field? What affects their day-to-day operations, and what do we need to bring up and elevate up to leadership to make us a better fighting force? And I think having a day that's solely focused on that, and that whole audience truly should be our service members, and having folks then from leadership and folks that can make decisions or influence decisions up the chain, just sit back and listen to what the fleet and the Marines are telling them. And then maybe have some sidebars that kind of troubleshoot some of that stuff to come up with solutions. It's great to have problems, but let's also come to the table if we have some solutions.
So I know Art is going to clean up operation here. We did capture already some of the after actions that you all submitted, and this is how we summarize it. Incorporate more active duty presenters to the agenda to include non-spectrum managers to try to understand, but we'll try to add to it, as well as when people register at the time of registration, request a topic, that we can then try to source the right individual or organization to try to help answer some of that, Rich. But we'll definitely add a little more context to what you mentioned.
Not the seasoned necessarily people on the panel, but have the active duty sitting on the panel. That's what I thought I heard, because I liked that. I thought that was awesome. Well, and I want to say this one thing. So when we talked about modernizing Spectrum 21, think bigger than that. Big. You know, what do you really want to see it do? Make it robust. So not just modernize. What does that mean to you? So you have time to come, you know, send comments up on what does that look like. When you sit at Spectrum 21, when you go back, what do you want to see it do? It could do a lot more things than, you know, just submitting records up. So think big. Spend our tax dollars properly. And maybe we can figure it out. Since that's where we do all the data calls, I don't know. Maybe SRF can pay for it. I don't know.
Okay.
I think Tom was next in the chute.
Okay, go ahead.
You may have captured this somewhere else, I don't know. Certification, and I think we talked about this a little bit, certification of, certification and host nation coordination for devices like, Wi-Fi, WAPs. We're certifying laptops, tablets, things that are universally, the spectrum's already identified. Is there going to be some guidance coming out about those types of devices?
Noted. I will let the, trying to just capture it down, Tom. I believe that you could provide a much more comprehensive definition. So we did capture that.
Alrighty. So foremost, I'm Gara, financial side. This year we did a little different where I did not brief, but I did have a breakout. And I noticed as I listened to a lot of briefs, so I listened to people ask questions, I heard finance come up, or how much this cost, or what are the constraints, and what you're looking for to improve from a spectrum relocation, or whether it's spectrum financials. And maybe it would be best for me to send out something or a questionnaire to see what questions would like to be addressed at ITEs, so that it can be more of a productive briefing from me to actually tap on the questions that you have, or to provide more information that can be more insightful of how to go about getting your cost estimates in, or how to get money to assist with your portfolios or programs, especially as we go down the roads of getting new studies, or if we're already in an auction, things that are constraints that weren't addressed when the actual auctions happened and we're in transition plans. So I will take my own action item to send out a questionnaire to ask the Spectrum community, what are financial questions, concerns that you have or would like us to address in IT East? And maybe that'll give us a better involvement of conversation versus me rambling down the spectrum policies or the laws or the constraints of finance, but actually be able to tap into what your actual concerns are.
But let me also add, teammate, but attach the brief, because if you didn't see it, maybe that would trigger, and I'm gonna stump one more time, Annex O, so that we can help explain that, so they can help explain that. So look at all of that and then formulate your questions. Here you go, man. Was that Art? All right, we're done.
So Robert Laura's up next.
Good to go? Okay. So yesterday, we got into some discussion with the panel, and we didn't have time to go into a Q&A as much as I think we would have liked to. We had to press on. And so I apologize if I was being disruptive, because I'm very passionate about, the field and helping other Marines and sailors get educated about things that we have done. For myself, I've done this for 40 years, starting out as a communicator, spectrum manager, policy, acquisition, host nation, working from U.S. Forces Japan, dealing with everything that comes into theater. So I've been around the block a little bit, right? And I just wanted to kind of share some of my thoughts about what happened yesterday and how maybe we could think a little bit differently and kind of take away from some of that problem set. Because every time you have a problem, you got to try to come up with a solution. So I'm just giving some food for thought here. How many program managers are here, acquisition people, that actually field stuff that goes host nation to the forces, whether it's Marine Corps, Army, or Air Force or Navy? How many people field things here, responsible? Okay, you support them. So when we talked about certification yesterday, we talked about 1494s. 1494s are antiquated, right? And we talked about, you know, how it takes so long to get the right information in a 1494 when it's coming from a program manager maybe that doesn't understand the lingo, doesn't understand the type of data that needs to go into a 1494, what you're looking for, units of measure, et cetera, right? So one of the things that I've seen over the years is when you have, especially in the Army, because they're huge, right? They've got hundreds of program managers that are maybe trying to field one capability as a system of systems. So what happens over the years, what I've seen is you've got, say, 10 or 15 different program managers, right? They all have their own responsibility to field that one particular piece of gear. So what happens? They are responsible to fill out a 1494 per 4650, right? They send that up to the Army Spectrum Office or NMSC, and then it goes to an action officer. So what happens when you got 20 different pieces? The same action officer doesn't get the same piece of equipment to look at for compliance. Would everybody agree? Elvira, maybe you can comment from NMSC standpoint when you work there. And when you don't have the same action officer that's looking at perhaps a system of systems, and you send that further on down to the host nation, it get further diluted, and then that person on the other end has a hard time clarifying and articulating to the host nation what they're trying to do. So when you're asking somebody for a spectrum and you're saying, I got 20 different pieces of gear, and they're looking at you like, wait, these are all different things, and you're asking for all this different spectrum, instead of articulating and saying, this is a system of systems, and it's replacing this with this, it makes it a little simpler, right? So that's part of the problem that I've seen, because when we had, for example, when I was at the CFT from 19 to 22, and I retired in 22 as a Department Army civilian. So when you have 10 different PMs and they're submitting all these things, and it's supposed to really be one capability set, which is what they just gotten away from, it's hard to articulate that to the host nation when that's what you're doing. And it was primarily in the European theater when it started out with Cape sets, right? But that's one of the things that I saw was a problem, and maybe there's something we can take from that to see how that works. Now, the other part is dealing with the technology, right? Because it's, you know, we're thinking like, how do we get away from filling out these things? Well, maybe there's a chat GPT function or AI function that can help us in that regard with the technology. So that's just a thought. And I think we need to get away from the, you know, the manual input part, which would be helpful, I think, and we need to come away with maybe using the technology to our advantage to advance it so that it isn't so hard. The other part is when PMs get that responsibility, they normally have to hire somebody to do it that's really come away from the spectrum field that understands it or maybe is learning it. Because every PM doesn't understand what you need in a 1494. They're just handing it off to somebody because they have 100 other tasks that they're responsible to do. So that's the other problem that we have in that sense, right?
Starting to mix in together.
Yep.
Who's taking them? Because I heard 4 there.
Yep.
And I'll say that your program office, some action is done. We'll have that integrated into the East Coast. Ray talked to Todd Barnhill. We're going to have a breakout session specifically with program managers to do that. But I still
Yep.
want it to be taken as an action because this is how we share that information back with Todd that it's a requirement.
Right.
And it's already been discussed. So they own the program managers, ASNRDA.
Right.
Mission accomplished.
Yeah, and I think one of the last things that we had come away with, we had a working group amongst DOD, Army, and some other folks on different formats, but we thought about having maybe an information repository, kind of like a waveform repository where you had like a wealth of knowledge where you could just tap in and have that information so, you know, a PM without any knowledge could actually go in and go, oh, here's that information. It's kind of like a chat GPT function. If I don't know, I can just kind of share that information because then it makes it easier for everybody else because right now it's a challenge. I got to give you that. It's a challenge. If you don't have somebody that has that experience, it's not there. I don't know if you agree with that or not, but I think it would definitely be beneficial because I've seen them struggle over the years, and I don't think it's getting any better, to be honest with you. I think you almost have to have, you know, a seat of support to bring somebody on to help you do these types of things. And one of the things that we did with experimental systems, and I'll close on this, a lot of R&D work that's experimental never goes to a 1494. I established an MOU between Army Spectrum Office, C5 ISR Center, which is their primary R&D for the Army, and PM Tactical Radios, which is responsible for fielding and equipping, right? So what we did is we established a memorandum that said, here's the minimum requirements you need to get a temporary authority for a frequency to do testing. Do you need a 1494 to do that? I would argue you don't. As long as you have the minimum requirements for the frequency band, the emissions, the antenna, some set requirements. And we established that, and everybody agreed to it, which made it a lot easier to get something on a small business innovative research task, which you're trying to save money. So you don't want to bring somebody on to do a full SSRA and a 1494 just to get 6 weeks of testing. It's just money not well spent. And so we established that MOU to be able to get that done, and everybody agreed to it. To include, you know, the folks over at Fort Sam Houston, right, that were in agreement where there's a lot of testing being done there. Back then was Fort Bragg, and we got some really good agreements to do that kind of thing. So I heard a lot about SSRAs, I heard a lot about 1494s, and I think we can omit some of that in lieu of having an MOU, an agreement, a principal agreement that said as long as you don't exceed these parameters, you're good. And you can save a lot of money, especially when you're the guy that's trying to save money from the government side, right? And I learned that while I was up there too. So we did shave some of that, but I just wanted to share that.
That there's a minimum requirements for host nation coordination. So maybe we need to take a look at what the minimum is for the other countries. Why do we have to put us in a hurt locker, putting so much and making a standard here when there's a different standard over there? So let's, maybe we can streamline that to that country, whatever that is, whatever the minimum is for. Well, it's probably similar for most of those countries over there, and not do so much extra on the U.S. side. Anyway, but thank you, Laura.
That sounds like an action.
So back in 2006, I went to visit with the German government, right? And these are civilian sides, not on the mill side, right? So back then, I was working JTRS back when it started, in like around 2006 time frame, I picked that up here, at ASW. So we were coming over a briefing at the European Joint Frequency Panel, and one of my colleagues, Bernie, and I, we went to visit the German civilians down in mines. And we said, how do you guys deal with software-defined radios? Because that's what it was all about, right? JTRS was all software-defined. And we said, how do you guys deal with this? And they said, well, we've established a policy. It's a not-to-exceed value. If you don't exceed this power and you don't exceed this emission, it's a green light. You just give us the paper that says this is what you're doing, and we're going to green light it. We don't care what you do with it as long as it doesn't exceed these values, right? It's kind of like a car standard with, the Highway Transportation Administration. As long as your glass meets this criteria, you can drive that car. I know it's a little bit simplified, but it's almost the same, right? And I agree with you. I think we can do that. But the other point I wanted to make is when I left, go ahead. No, I just wanted to close on her comment because I think it's important that I'll close on this and then I'll give the mic back. But having that conversation with the host nation frequency coordinators is important and imperative to be able to arm them to go to their counterparts to really kind of talk about what we need and what we're asking for. Because if you dilute that as it goes along, they can't articulate and fight for you when you need it. And that's what we're missing. Okay.
So before we go on, we're going to hand it off to one more. But what I'd like to do is hear from the uniform guys because I'm of the aspect of I work for you, and as much as everybody likes to hear that they're in charge, I'm not in charge. You're the customer. You're in charge. I need to hear what you need, what you require, and that's what we should be working towards until we start thinking that way, even if it takes me doing a roadshow to come down to you to talk to a very specific group to hear what's going on with you and some of the key capabilities that we need to describe and improve. Let's do that. But my foundation is I don't I don't do this for myself, I do it for y'all. So let's change that aspect. If I need to come down and hear your thoughts, let's do it, because you are the customer. Over to you.
Hey, thanks, Art. My name's Tom Shanholtz. I'm with eSimplicity, and so we actually support NMSC on spectrum certification, but in a previous life, I did a lot of work with spectrum relocation and spectrum efficiency. And I've heard some comments. I mean, yesterday there was a panel, we talked about what can we do to be more efficient with spectrum. Also heard comments on 1494s and things like that. And where spectrum efficiency really starts with, we need accurate data. And we typically mine that data out of the 1494. Anybody who's ever used Spectrum 21 realizes it's somewhat limited as to what it can do. It's limited into the data that it extracts. It pulls from the GMF. It estimates what bandwidths look like, selectivities and things like that. It's very inefficient with Spectrum when you do that. One of the things I'd be more than happy to do is present at the next conference some of the results, preliminary results of our studies that we did when we showed when we mined that data out of Spectrum 21, how much more spectrum was actually available to you, the warfighter, or if we have to compress for auctions or if we have to share, just how radically different those results are that we get with an enhanced version of something like Spec 21 and using enhanced data. You would be amazed. And I heard you talk about it being antiquated, the 1494, what the data's in there, correct. A couple more things that would really help get us into the future would be, no kidding, where are these systems actually going to operate? You know, not just a center point and a 1,000-kilometer radius of mobility, but where really do we operate would be one improvement. And then some of the other things that would really help is to know if there's some way we can actually find out when you're going to operate. Okay, time of use is really important because we manage spectrum traditionally in two ways, with distance separations and with frequency separations. But we're not very good at time of use. And that's a whole third dimension that we're not taking advantage of. So those are some of the things that we could be looking at in the future for improvements to the 1494 process, but also some algorithms that could be used to improve the tools that we use to do spectrum planning, spectrum compressions, frequency assignments, and things like that. And I'd be more than happy to present some of the results that we discovered during the work we were doing when we were supporting AWS-3 and then the sensor program.
I'll tell you that 1494 process is too hard, and software can do it for us a lot quicker. Let's take man out of the loop and let the software do the work for us. That should be our focus, not creating another tool that essentially makes a human hand jam something into a computer. I would rather manage the resource than the data that I'm punching into the computer.
All right. Gunny Black over here at Stratcom. So quick question for the group, especially for Don CIO. We've talked about modernizing out the yin-yang probably all week. I guess the main question that no one's probably brought up is, when are we going to start looking at updating policies? Because we can say that we're going to update all these softwares and everything, but it's going to bite us on the backside when it comes to, well, we're going against what policy states. I don't know how many times I've been face punched by updating all the spectrum requirements when it comes to all the CJ, CS publications, and all of a sudden it's like, oh, it's not a program of record. I don't know how many times, and that's with Joint Staff and all the other combatant commands. So my main question to the group, especially for you guys, is does it need to be a unified front from not only the Dawn, but with the Marine Corps, the Army, and the Air Force to actually be a unified front to talk to and engage with Joint Staff, and then in turn bring that up to DoD CIO, and not just, oh, hey, we got it for action. No, like what steps are we actually going to do to start refining this? Because prime example, I just had a sidebar earlier today, kind of like what the president does, executive actions. Everybody's got to meet those executive actions, and then everything will follow suit. So like refining the 1494 process, modernizing Spectrum 21, GEMSIS, things of that nature. So I don't know what the Navy's got to do or as a unified front from holistically from the DoD, but I hear it all the time at Stratcom and some of the other combatant commands saying we can't do anything until policy's been updated. So over to Don TIO.
So, not to be kind of funny with this, but the first song that comes into my mind is Breaking the Law. And I say it with a grain of salt because I realize that we're never going to have policy that supports current technology. So we're going to have to take some risks and start moving forward to where we need to go. And that foundation is how do we do that and ensure that you have senior leadership backing. I think with senior leadership engagement right now, they're willing to start leaning forward and looking at how do we do that holistically, just because the realization is until we start doing it, I would say from a Department of Defense standpoint, we've been itching at high bandwidth type architectures, and the only thing that has done from a policy standpoint is limited us to waivers for wideband operations and very discrete frequency assignments. The capabilities that we're describing to have within the next 2 years is going to need wideband type operations, and it's going to take a different architecture that we haven't been able to design under the current policies. So changing the game, we have to start thinking about it and how we incorporate it, but I want to do it smartly with the key strategy that tells our program managers how to build to it. But I'm still a believer that we're going to have to sit in the same room like this and really start knocking out what that roadmap, what that architecture looks like holistically across the United States.
Good afternoon, team. So, sir, I just had a question concerning EW and EA. I know Truant Officer Reese mentioned that the Marine Corps is trying to go towards EA ranges just to allow flexibility of training. I believe the Army and a lot of the other services are doing as well. My question specifically to the Navy and the Marine Corps is there a repository that exists? Similar to Spectrum 21, right, when you want a resource, you can go in there, find USMPs, and support your requirement. Is there a database that hosts all of the EAs that are done yearly or short period? Because for my time in Hawaii and in California, I would have to reach out to the local ISM or the NMCSO and get specific like EAs that were standing. But I'm wondering if, like, across the Don, right, stateside, if there's already a repository where you're like, I need to do EA in this state, and then you kind of just, these are all the things that are already standing, to just make the process faster. That's my question, sir.
You can answer that.
So I will tell you that doesn't exist today, but I will tell you that Don CIO, OpNav, and Headquarters Marine Corps have been meeting with a corporation that looks at the whole supply chain requirements and how do we essentially make that information more accessible very rapidly from a platform level so we can see key capabilities, effects. If we move one system, we don't see the second and third order effects as a result of taking that piece out of it and all the ties. That would be a great capability to integrate because for me, it would be beneficial from a supply chain standpoint if I could just display these are all the radios that are available to you that do this, and then we can select and ensure. And if it's specs that we're just entering into a database and dragging it over and dropping it into our EMBM, and it does all the work for you, that's what we should be doing. But those are the ideas that we need to start thinking about.
Thank you, Art. Sorry, I just wanted to add regarding policy. So policy is near and dear to my heart. I'm drowning in it, right? But the reality is we should not try to create new processes, right? We actually have MCEB, FP, which, and I think you participate in there. This is where all the policy for EMS across, regardless of the service, is kind of introduced and or put on the table. So the MCEB FP provides information up to ultimately the MCEB, not necessarily with the 4. So before we try to reach around the ideas of creating something new, let's find out what is already established and use that. I mean, it was created for a purpose, and it's not antiquated. I was hoping Joint Staff was still here, but they should definitely have an insight on that because covering for us all, unless you're asking for a Navy, Marine Corps, which ultimately the Don, yeah, but we can't work like that because I would say Spectrum is purple. So that's my take.
Real quick, with that topic, and I want to make sure that I'm very clear here, and I know I was somewhat being funny on the context of breaking the law. What I'm saying here is that we want to champion those capabilities going forward, and let's work together to come up with the right process that allows us to get there. And I realize that that policy is not going to support that requirement almost 99% of the time, but what we face in the future, we're going to have to be very innovative, and we're going to have to do it rapidly. Let's work together to get it right and ensure that once we have it right, then we can ensure that the policies follow the requirements that we're developing holistically. But I would say that I say this all the time. Our policies today were built in the 1950s for very conservative for tube-type technology. It probably needs a whole revamp of key capabilities in technology and how they operate today.
Real quick, I'll take 10 seconds. If you're getting ready to retire, and I meant to mention this earlier, we are at NIWC LANT 59130 looking for a spectrum manager. So once this hiring freeze gets lifted, you want a job, contact me. Yes, we can, with your money. So, that's all I got.
So I know it's been touched on this while I was waiting on the mic, but policy is still a big limiting factor right now for 1494s. That's currently that's policy that's required 1494s. So I know it's been hit on several times, but we need to look at updating the policy requirements. So until that's updated, 1494s are required. I know someone mentioned in one of the briefs, we've had partner nations say the 1494 is just way too antiquated and it requires too much data, but it's our current policy. So, and then for the related to the 1494s, we have a small team of engineers at NMSC, so they see all the requirements that come through there. So sometimes they see multiple systems that come through. So if it is a system of system, going back to one of the other briefs, because there's been a lot of great briefs, if you collaborate together, then maybe some of those things can be sent up at the same time, or the level of detail isn't there when they're first sent up to NMSC. So the more detail, the better. So when our engineers are reviewing these policies or these systems, they can know, hey, this one is part of a system of system. So a lot of that can be very helpful as well. And then for the EA discussion, all that obviously for the Navy and Marine Corps comes through NMSC. So we have a way to track, but that also goes back, ties into my policy statement. Right now, the EA request and approvals only list the frequency bands. It doesn't, it's not a requirement to list the system. So the support is already out there and we're able to sometimes share current approvals, but it doesn't require the listing of equipment. So that's another one that we need to maybe look at, updating the CJ, CSM to maybe require that information.
Sounds like the next audit needs to be on our policy. Honestly, I mean, accountability comes with essentially putting your name on the table and essentially being directed, because the audit team has evaluated all our policies and determined what we need to do to change them. And once they document and identify that it's a requirement, I can't back out of it. I have to come up with a solution. And that's one of the key pieces and benefits of using audits, because it holds me accountable, and it really does. So maybe that's an aspect of what needs to change, is accountability on our policies. Anybody? So we have time. What I wanted to do is ensure that we gave our uniform folks an opportunity to speak, because like I said, I work for you, and I want to make sure that everything that we're doing is looking out for your best interest, and those requirements take us really sometimes digging deep, and I can come up with the vision, but the vision doesn't matter unless your ideas are integrated with that vision, because if I deliver something that doesn't benefit you, then what's the use? And we need to start describing what those capabilities are. You'll see that Ms. Rathman has integrated spectrum as a priority in her vision. We put assured spectrum access at this point, and we're going to have to build on it and what that really looks like. It's probably going to take us another 6 months, but it's going to take y'all being critical on what that looks like, because I'm not going to do it alone. I need to do it with the operating forces in mind, because it's not my vision that I'm delivering, it's yours. So I look forward to having more candor when it comes down to, you're not going to hurt my feelings, because this is what I'm here for.
Thank you, Art. We're at AFCIA West, and if you I'm sure everybody's gone around and looked at all the booths, right? So, wow, that's a great technology. I want to go fight with that tomorrow in Japan, right? Nope, let's go look at that technology and we'll get it in 5 years from now certified and we can take it to Oconus. So that's the mindset where our back's up against the wall right now. Like, that commercial industry has this technology that's going to solve our problem right now, but we cannot take it forward for the next 2 years. 2 years, we'll say 2, and it went really fast when we got it certified, but that's what we're up against. And then 2 years from now, it's dated. 3, 4 years from now, like, it's legacy at that point. Technology is out cycling our certification process. So.
And if I could, before Mark goes, before we do leave as well, if there are any NMSC-related questions, please catch us before we leave. We don't have engineer support here in person, but we can take those actions back with myself and the team. But if you do have NMSC-related questions, please let us know.
Okay, I'm going to add a couple of statements so we don't try to reduce some confusion. I hope try to reduce some confusion. So, and when I mentioned in my brief earlier in the week, David and I have the office that's in charge of cross-warfighting domain electromagnetic interference and spectrum concerns. But it relies on a partnership with everyone who owns a capability, radar owners, EW owners, and so on. And I don't want to give you the wrong impression, especially on this updated training that Rich Segura's spearheading right now. The idea here is that we, through my office, are trying to refresh and update the Navy Training Systems Plan for E-cubed and Spectrum. And updating means making it more in line with what we're trying to do as a Navy, Marine Corps, and DoD. That is, make it more reflective of EMSO in general. I'm not, my office, David and I are not the lead office for EMSO for the Navy. That would be N2N6W. And my point in that is that it's a great, it's wonderful for me as the requirements officer for E-cubed Spectrum and the associated NTSP. It's one thing for me to say, hey, we need to update that and make it more inclusive or broadly applicable for EMSO. I gotta get a lot of buy-in from everybody who's involved. So I will tell you what that means in terms of discussion as of today. I've had at least maybe 1 or 2 discussions at my level, at the GS 1506 level. But I haven't had the discussion, and that discussion is about, I would like your buy-in, contribution, your participation in updating the NTSP, the E-cubed Spectrum NTSP, so it's more of an EMSO NTSP. And I am not bashing or denigrating anybody. The hesitancy, that's my bad language. Any hesitancy that I'm sensing with the N2N6W folks is from the standpoint, okay, if you're talking to me about updating NTSP to cover this area that N2N6W have the CNO lead for, EMSO, you're talking about the potential to influence requirements for billets, all sorts of resourcing implications. So I haven't, go figure, there hasn't been a wonderful embracing of, yeah, let's do this right now. We're going to get there. But that is a challenge that I have to work. I'm going to have David, I'm going to drag David along with me. We're going to work through that, okay? So I want to let you know that I understand better than anybody that, and quite frankly, the more I heard everybody, and I'm very thankful everybody brought their stories about EMSO and training and what works. The comment about I think on-the-job training is better. That was perfect. That type of comment is perfect. And it really lets us know where, it's an observation like that that really lends itself to the concept of get real, get better. So because of statements like that and hearing them, the larger community, I'm going to bring that back to the table for my brothers and sisters W, so we can get real, get better on training and training in the context of EMSO. The second and final point I'll make is that I also appreciate the openness of some of the efforts that have been going on, in particular the 5G work that we heard from this afternoon. I heard some things I wasn't that were new to me, and I'm glad I heard about it. And that is, in particular, as I was talking with Andrew, is the crane effort for the test bed for DSS. Well, that's important. I want to know about that because my boss, Vice Admiral Thomas, and in particular his deputy, Ms. Jennifer Edgen, are maintaining the Navy lead for DSS, the U.S. Navy lead for DSS. And we have, Ms. Edgen has assigned Navy Research Lab as the prime organization, the prime Navy organization, to be involved with the research and development on DSS. So don't be surprised if as we go back to our offices, if you get an email or phone call from me that says, hey, I would like to hear a little more about your effort you brought up at the conference here. The crane example is one that we're gonna reach back and get a little more information to understand, and I may ask for participation at Ms. Edgen's monthly CFT. So that's good news because it gets you a chance to bring up to the 3-star level awareness of these efforts that are going on and give us a chance to capitalize and even not just capitalize, but to find a way to optimize the message for larger discussions, including at Congress. Okay, so that's the final shots I have for right now. Thank you.
So I'm not going to keep you here all day. I realize that some of us have to catch flights, but I want to reiterate the topic, breaking the law. That key piece is there's processes in place that allow us to go and ask for those requirements. And when I say I want to champion that capability, that's exactly where we started with 5G. Key pieces, anytime that we talk about discussions coming to you, we're going to be coordinating with your service leads to ensure that occurs appropriately. And secondly, we want to help you get there and start getting those capabilities rapidly so we could support the real warfighting mission. And we just need to come up with that process like we did with 5G that had all the senior leadership to include federal agencies' approval on how we get there. But that foundation has to, and that discussion has to occur, else we'll never get there. So let's work on that. But that foundation of where do we go in the future, I'd like to start having discussions with spectrum planners, signal intelligence and electronic warfare officers so we can start aligning our mission statements and ensure that everything that I've been hearing about EMSO, EMS, GEMSO components, we start aligning those efforts. And if I need to go over to the joint staff and talk to Bo so we can bring them along. But I can't sit here and wait for it to occur on its own until we get in the room and start making change. It's never going to occur. Then I'll end lastly. I take responsibility for everything that's occurred over the last 20 years and it taking this long for us to start having these types of discussions and getting senior leadership involved. But I'm telling you, I'm here to help you make change as long as you help me. Outside of that, unless there's nothing further, I won't hold up anybody else. Anything from admin before we close?
Well, Art, you already know me well enough. There is always something admin that we got to finish up with. To the less fun part, we got to clean up. So this room has been good to us. If you brought it with you, please take it with you. If not, there's a trash can over there. Help us all out to make sure that we are good stewards of the location that we're borrow or the temp loaners to us. So thank you in advance for helping us with that. Number two, our admin support team shared the summit survey. I counted roughly about 60 individuals here today physically. So if you have not submitted one, please take a good 1 minute, 2 minutes, maybe 5. Fill it out. It will help us greatly, especially Art, to kind of explain how things were going well or not. So, and then last but not least, I was going to recommend to the NMSC team to, instead of standing in the door, to stand up in the front. So in case anybody has any question with NMSC, frequency proposals, certifications, this is the time, their attention. The moment that we get on the plane and we get back, those inboxes are pretty full. Getting their attention is going to be difficult, so leverage this opportunity that they're still here and make the connection. Also, we have Chief Officer for Reese, Mr. David Willis, Mr. Mark Johnson. The service leads are here physically. If you have anything in your mind, now is your time. Don't let it go to waste. That's all I have, Art.
We clap. I want to make sure that the one piece that I didn't acknowledge earlier is I want to thank the audio and visual team for making this such a great conference. Like anything else, IT is IT. We're going to have mistakes. That's just part of the problem. We're going to have to troubleshoot. Everybody in here that's worn the uniform has troubleshot some type of system one way or another. And just give a round of applause for the IT folks. So, thank you for your time. I look forward to seeing you the next time.